John Barleycorn, a short story, written by Amy Boucher and read by Owen Staton. As soon as I laid eyes on the priest, I knew he must die. There was something about him that unnerved me, that shook me to my core. It was an uncanny feeling, a feeling that left me desperately searching for answers. It felt like he was somehow more than he should be, something terrible, something more than human. Take the subtle golden hues of his hair, for example. Of course, they were seemingly innocuous in the half-light, but when bathed in the sun's glow, he shimmered endlessly like fields of corn. Then there were his eyes, his awful, awful eyes. They were too blue, too blue. He had a stillness about him, a stillness that seemed to bestow upon you a kind of grace, a grace that made you afraid to meet his gaze, lest your secret desires and tar-black thoughts be realized. Who was this man, this purported gentleman of the cloth, who had wandered into the village one day, seemingly unannounced? No priest or curate had I ever seen like him. No, I often wondered what profane and ancient knowledge he held beneath that brow. Trickster! Such questions tormented me, and his unrepentant gaze seemed to be burned into my skull. He mocked me with his cheery countenance and that chilling, unwavering stare. As time went on, my curiosity, it grew to discontent and eventually hatred. I loathed him, and somehow knew that he was to blame for all my previous suffering. So I began to avoid the church completely. I couldn't bear to witness this devil, this false prophet, preach the gospel. Religion had been such a previous source of joy in my life, but now it was tainted. There was pestilence and locusts everywhere. Instead, I took to solitude and isolation. Convinced it would be my saviour, I turned to the fields and furrows in hope that a quiet azure solitude would purge my unclean thoughts. The days slowly melted away, and the priest made himself a prominent feature of the village. Of course, the congregation flocked to him. Idolatrous fools, they showered him with platitudes, even invited him into their homes. They were so eager to win the favour of Baphomet that they didn't see how the machinations of his control were unfolding. My hatred in this time only grew deeper, more destructive, and stronger was my resolve. I knew I would be the one to undo him. It wasn't long before spring danced across the valley, though it carried with it strange portents and omens of ill. The village, being predominantly made up of the rich arable land, was usually drenched in the essence of life at this time. But alas, now it lay barren, devoid of any life or colour. This continued for some time, and soon enough people began to panic, whispering quietly of catastrophe. After this the days grew drier. Little rain fell, and the rivers began to run dry. A general malaise fell upon the population as people began to fear what was in store. I myself tried to keep a level head and took to recording the event meticulously, keeping an eye out for further signs or presages. I could tell we were at the advent of some unprecedented time, and thus saw it my duty to record the happenings. No crops grew, no sign of life, and the colour drained from the vale, leaving darkness, fear, and uncertainty. Of course, The villagers flocked to the priest, and he tried to soften them with hollow words and a forked tongue. I could see through him, though. I understood his deceit. I knew that I would have to be stronger than the rest. I knew that I had to think sensibly. However, I was soon to be met with further challenges. My determination faded on the day that the birds fell. En masse, they danced from the heavens, only to hit the floor with a resounding thud. Their once vibrant bodies now lay broken, littering the earth. It was a pitiful sight. To see them reduced to such fragile things. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve it at all. Whilst walking through the barren fields, I happened upon a whole flock of them, lying dead beneath the branches. Grief overcame me. My veins and capillaries flooded and burst from the pressure. I fell to the floor, muffling sobs with my hands. This was too much. Too much. Sitting beneath the dead oak, I wept desperately. I wanted to restore them, to share my life force. I picked them up, held their small bodies to my chest, and threw them skyward, begging them to take their wings and soar. But they fell, and soon crashed to the ground. My tears salted the earth. My heart was a chasm, now too black. He cursed us. This vile creature, arch-fiend, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He brought with him a pestilence, I was sure of it, and it was destroying my home. Without warning, I felt my spirits rise, inflating the space in my chest. There, as I sat upon the tainted earth, I made a promise to all that would listen. I would fix this mess. I resolved to be its saviour. I struck at night. Enveloped in the shadows, I walked, clad in death. It's hard for me to describe the look on his face when he saw me, stood over him, smiling. Such terror, such confusion. It was ecstasy. Oh, he had been such a fool, you see. He had not locked his front door, perhaps lured in by the safety of the village. For 2 nights previously I had completed the same ritual, climbing his ancient stairway, softly opening the door to his bedchamber, to stand before him. I waited, patiently, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, edging closer and closer to his bedside. This was the night. I moved even closer, so close I could feel his breath against my face. His eyes opened gently, looking up. He saw me, smiling. Quickly I mustered all my strength and struck him. Just once, with awesome force. It was enough to knock him unconscious. Here I acted methodically, wrapping his body in his bed linen. I even covered his face. I couldn't bear to look at it. With his unconscious state, it was difficult to move him. Isn't it strange how easily a human can be transformed into a leaden weight? I laboured on, however, convinced in the urgency of my noble pursuit, dragging him by the ankles down the stairs. His shallow breaths infuriated me. I wanted to cave in his skull, right then, in that moment, smash his brains and splatter them across the pavement. I wanted to destroy him, wipe him off the face of this planet, and remove the curse he'd put on me, on us. But I breathed deeply, The task had barely begun. I needed to see it through, do it right. There was a certain formality to consider. The birds had told me. They whispered their promises of rising again. He started to rouse as soon as we reached the fields. They were still devoid of any growth or crop. The bastard clawed at the sheet like a kitten, weak and desperate. His muffled pleas were music to my ears, urging me forward, driving me on. When we reached the centre of the field, I slammed his body down. It made a gentle thud. The silence was calming. It promised new life. I waited, ignoring his quiet pleas, and breathed in the fading darkness. It would soon be dawn, and we would fix it together. We would make it right. I could barely contain my excitement. The gentle rise of the sun felt euphoric as it warmed my skin. My heart was a drum clattering in my chest. But I felt calm. I was where I should be. It was time. I lifted the sickle and tore at the sheet, revealing his flesh to the light. He was crying now, crying as I laughed with newfound joy. He begged me. Oh, how he begged in those final moments, his lips laced with false promises. But I was unrepentant. I stood still, smiling as the tears danced down my cheek. I lifted the sickle with purpose and chanted with every fibre of my being. I make this vow upon this stubborn ground. John Barleycorn must die. Silence. My breath was thunder across the land, which was now painted red. The harvest will come again.